Okay, this chapter is really the introduction to dementia material. So, I'm going to skip some of the really boring parts or redundant parts, but okay, so the first thing is this picture here is conventional medicine a witch doctor clown show? And like I said, when I was a kid, I saw a cartoon making fun of a guy for going to a witch doctor with a bone in his nose, and he thought, "Oh, isn't that stupid? He's going to a witch doctor for a magic potion." But isn't that what people do with American medicine? They go to the doctor and they want a pill, a magic potion. Um, and we used to think, oh, anything that's not allopathic medicine is stupid, but maybe allopathic medicine is the one that's stupid. Putting forth a magic potion, cure a patient and you lose a customer. So conventional medicine, it not only claims to not understand the cause of the treatment of conventional disease, but it doesn't want the patient to get better because you stop making money on them. If you make a low-fat vegan and empower the patient, you lose them. They can take care of themselves. But in real life, what happens is hardly anybody wants to be low-fat vegan. It's a very small percentage of the patients. So most patients, they never get better. They keep on taking their pills as they decline, and then they go for surgeries. They usually take the pills for life. Here's about how it distributes out. The vast majority of Americans, they're fat and sick and completely ignorant about nutrition, toxicology. They're eating the SAD diet, paleo, keto, carnivore, low carb, some variant of that. A lot of doctors are what I would call sort of half screwed as far as diet's concerned. They're more of a lacto, ovo, pesco, vegetarian type. And they're a little bit better off. That'll tend to slow things down about 10 years or so, but they still end up with fat and sick with the same diseases. And they're very few, I call them the health aristocrats, really, take it the whole 9 yards. I use the abbreviation ADS for average dumb shit, which is most people, and a lot of them, hey, they're real nice, but, being nice isn't good enough. If you want to be healthy, you need to learn this stuff, and it's pretty basic. What are people deficient in? They're deficient in potassium, fiber, nitrates, and antioxidants, magnesium, the stuff you get from plants. Okay. This is just a little joke. I joke a lot of times about these saints and stuff. So here's St. Augustine. This is his conversion moment when he's in the garden and he heard the sound in his mind, tolle legge, which means pick up and read. And he picked it up into a random spot and it said, this is Romans 13:13. It said, "Let us walk properly in the day and not spend nights in drunkenness and orgies." And he converted at that moment. Okay, and so that's kind of how I felt when I first realized all this stuff is in the nutrition epidemiology and toxicology lecture. I've been studying like crazy all this conventional stuff for years, and it didn't really amount to much. And then once I learned, all this nutrition epidemiology, toxicology, like the basics of it, I was all excited, thinking, no, everybody's going to be happy. I'm going to make money. I'm going to start curing all these patients. But then, everybody said they don't want any part of it. Most of the patients and family members. So that was St. Augustine catching the truth there in that drawing. Okay. Why should you read this book? I'm going to skip over some of this boring stuff. And one point I would make is, in sports, everybody wants to win. The coach, the athletes, the team, the fans, the parents. But in medicine, it's bizarre. It's like strange to me. Everyone expects that the patient will never get better. It's strange. Oh, these patients, they're always sick. They're never going to get better. It's weird. And that's why, if you have a sports team or an individual athlete, you keep track of your progress. Are we winning more games? Is the athlete, hitting more home runs? Is he, scoring more? Whatever he does. Whereas in medicine, almost no one keeps track of patient outcomes. The patient's like irrelevant. Whatever happens to the patient, if they live or they die, it doesn't matter. As long as we generate billing codes, we get paid no matter what the outcomes are. We just say everything's a standard of care. But the standard of care is always designed for cognitively impaired people because it makes the assumption that the patient can't help themselves at all. So a patient who can actually help themselves by, learning how to eat better and how to avoid toxins, get to sleep, all these things, they improve their outcome. But the assumption is always made that they can't do anything for themselves, and that's another reason why the treatment almost always is a drug. Okay, let's see. Yeah, a lot of people, I think, just don't understand that the medical system doesn't care about them at all. None. Zero. And the higher you go up in the medical system, the people who really own the big companies around stuff, they think it's funny if you die, okay? They laugh at you, okay? So don't go looking for love at that place, all right? The individual doctors want to help you, and a lot of them really care and do the best they can for the patients. But they're kind of like school teachers. Even though they want to do the best for the patient, the system is not designed to help you. It's designed to make money off you. Okay, I'm going to go into all this stuff. I'm not going to get into all this stuff here. All right. I want to get into the dementia stuff. Oh, and so let's see. I have a little bit of philosophic intro stuff. Oh, well, one of the things I do want to go over is a lot of people say, oh, you don't need God. You should never talk about religion when you're talking about science or medicine. And I completely disagree with that based on spending my whole life in science and medicine. That if you don't agree that the conversation can flow in these directions, modern atheistic Darwinism is like the religion of contemporary society, whether you realize it or not. And it basically says that might is right. Whoever's got the power can do whatever they want. That's kind of what Darwinism is about to a large degree as well. And so what I'm trying to say, what this means in healthcare and medicine is if a big company buys a journal and the journal publishes an article saying their drug is good, then conventional medicine just accepts their drug. Okay? And that happens all day long, all the time. So that's why modern atheistic Darwinism doesn't work for science. It produces mostly fake science because it has no morals, it has no ethics. The ethics of modern atheistic Darwinism are that might is right, and might tends to mean money in this context. So whoever's got money can do whatever they darn well please, and all you pros, all you people out there, you're just peasants. You don't matter. You need to know that. They don't consider you to matter, and that's why you should be very careful about trusting them because they have no respect for you, none. Like I told you, I asked earlier in that section, would somebody who would give an amphetamine to a child, if they're poisoning a child, what do you think they think about poisoning you? None, okay? So you want to be careful about taking any pill. Is it made correctly? Does it really contain what it's supposed to contain? Is it safe? Does it have contaminants? Should I really be taking this pill? Okay, so some of this you've already heard me do. All right. And also notice when you read a nutrition expert or listen to their videos, who is empowering you? Who's making your life easier and better? Okay, then I joke, this book has so many academic orgasms, you should keep an extra pair of underwear available while reading it. I'm showing this picture of Dante. I kind of like the old Dante stuff. So there's the purgatory in the back. There's the Florence and the path towards heaven. And here's, down into the pits of hell. All right. So what's the point? We want to do all this stuff to avoid hell, and purgatory and just go to heaven if possible. And if you go to people who don't know what they're doing, like, some fat healthcare worker, they can't even prevent diabetes, hypertension, and obesity in themselves, they're going to be less likely to help you. The painting is The Blind Leading the Blind by Bruegel. Okay, what was that last painting? That was by Domenico di Michelino, Dante's Divine Comedy. Okay, here's just a quick thing from the Bible. I'm going to get into dementia here. This is Daniel when he was in, captivity in Babylon. And basically, he said, oh, we don't want to eat the meat. Just let us eat, the pulses, the peas and beans, vegetables to eat, water to drink. And then his men were healthier than the Babylon king's men who were eating all the meat and oils and stuff. Okay, so let's get to some important theories of dementia causation. The first one you should know is Jack Delatorre. And by the way, this is the best theory to know about dementia. I've studied a ton about this sort of thing, and it's not in any of the books. He wrote his own book called Alzheimer's Turning Point, Jack Delatorre, but it's not in any of the conventional medical books. And I'm talking about including the 1700-page one from Harvard and all these other places. That's why I consider those places a joke, okay? Because people sometimes ask me, how could I be so confident? How could I say things like, the Mayo Clinic is a joke, Harvard and the Ivy League is a joke? Because I know their journals and I know their papers, okay? They won't even mention Jack Delatorre, okay? They don't even mention any of the famous nutrition pioneers that you've heard of. All right, so then the other great theory of dementia is my theory, neurovascular uncoupling. All right, so let's talk about Jack Delatorre. He tied off the carotid artery in a mouse, and then he found middle-aged and older mice. 2 months later, they become demented. Then he did an autopsy expecting to see a big stroke on the same side that he tied off the carotid, but there was no stroke. So you say, well, what happened? The brain was just shrunken on the same side that he tied the carotid artery off. And what happens is neurons are dying through something called programmed cell death, and due to apoptosis. Okay? And he did a whole bunch of experiments. He would tie off both carotids, he'd tie off the vertebral arteries, posterior circulation, he'd tie off intracranial arteries like the middle cerebral artery, and he found that this was a way to make these mice demented. Okay? Mice tend to live about 2.5 to 3 years. Okay, what else did he do? Then people say, well, so what? Not that many people have atherosclerosis carotid artery occlusions. But what Delatorre phrased it as, he says they just have chronic cerebral hypoperfusion. Tons of people have that. And Delatorre explains why. Because let's say you have congestive heart failure. Lots of people have CHF, congestive heart failure. You're not pumping enough blood to the brain. You're like the mouse, chronic cerebral hypoperfusion. Perfusion means blood delivery, so under delivery of blood. Let's say they got atrial fibrillation, losing that atrial kick, atrial filling, about 25%. Let's say a cardiac output, like the mouse, mouse equivalent. Aortic regurg, aortic stenosis. You're not getting enough flow up there. You're like the mouse. And then you start seeing there's other things that are in a way like the mouse. Let's say you got a fat person with sleep apnea. You put a pulse ox on them to check their oxygen saturation of their blood at night. It can go down into the 60s, and guess what? They're not getting as good oxygen delivery as they should to the brain. That's kind of similar to being like the mouse. Okay. I'll joke. I'll call it glucose and oxygen delivery. It's usually abbreviated OGD, oxygen glucose delivery, but I'll abbreviate it as kind of as a joke, GOD, glucose oxygen delivery. Little g, not a capital G. Okay. So I thought that was pretty good. And he actually thinks Ronald Reagan, the reason why he became demented, like in the late 1980s, was because when he took one from, what's his name, he was hypotensive for a while, before they got him in the operating room and everything was completely optimized and stabilized. Okay, so that's an explanation how that could work. All right, now did I already go through Alzheimer's? I think I'm going to get to that in a sec. Because what you're going to hear is that, I forgot to mention the deal with hypertension. With hypertension, you're screwed either way. Okay, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So what I mean by hypertension is if you undertreat it, why do you have high blood pressure in the first place? To get blood to the top of your brain. You have to pump against gravity. So if you undertreat hypertension and you got really high pressure, that high pressure damages the arteries. I'll go through the mechanisms of atherosclerosis a little later, but the bottom line is the high systolic pressure hits the divider between a bifurcation point of tissue and it damages it. You get some fibrosis of the arterial walls, but it's a long story. You'll start forming blood clots at the bifurcations. The bottom line is if you have real high pressure, you damage your blood vessels and you get atherosclerosis. But if you overtreat the high pressure and drive the pressure down too low, then you don't get enough blood to your brain. You're like the mouse. You're a mouse equivalent. So either way, you're screwed with blood pressure other than trying to eat a healthy diet and try to get it under control, manage your stress, get your sleep, avoid caffeine, avoid other stimulants. Okay, and diabetes also damages the arterial wall in the brain, and microvasculopathy. The endothelial cells cannot control the amount of glucose they take up. So if you're chronically hyperglycemic from insulin resistance, you're chronically damaging the endothelial cells, which are part of the blood-brain barrier, and that's going to give you problems. Okay, let's see. Also, you can become cognitively impaired from open heart surgery because they'll run you post-op pretty hypotensive. My father had open heart surgery many years ago, about 25 years ago, and I didn't know as much back then. I tried to encourage him to go vegetarian diet. I knew about the Ornish diet. I didn't know about Esselstyn yet, and I hadn't read that much of this sort of issue. And so anyways, he went for open heart surgery. Post-op, they ran him like 90/60, really low pressure. And I'm like, well, I asked to speak to the anesthesiologist. I'm like, why are you running them so low? They go, we don't want them to bleed it as anastomosis, where they plug in the bypass graft, the connections. And my dad pulled through it pretty fine, but he was, a doctor, a pretty healthy guy compared to the average cabbage patient. I'm sure other ones, they might have not such a hard time. They got intracranial atherosclerosis. They might get some cognitive impairment from that. I'd expect it. There's even a name for it called pump head. Okay. Okay, so yeah, Delatorre's theories is often called the vascular hypothesis of dementia, and he calls it, being dementia due to chronic cerebral hypoperfusion. I just call it the mouse equivalent theory, and we just went through the things that are mouse equivalents: AFib, CHF, overtreated hypertension, for example, aortic regurg, aortic stenosis, post-cabbage hypotension, all of that stuff. Okay, here's Delatorre's book, and it's a great book. And it's basically just going to tell you what I told you, and he's also going to tell you he thinks that aluminum is not a significant cause of dementia. I think it is a significant cause of dementia. It's a neurotoxin, okay? And you got to remember, he's got a pretty big bias. He wants to prove that his theory is the main thing. And I do think it's super important. In my experience, I look at many thousands of brains. What Delatorre is saying totally makes sense. I actually think he's right. I think it's multifactorial. A lot of things are contributing to dementia. So you want to minimize all your risk factors, okay? But now now that you've got deletories, you can think intelligently about dementia. And now I'm going to talk about the stupid stuff you hear, the word on the street. You're always going to hear, and doctors will tell you this, even neurologists will say this. Oh, Alzheimer's dementia is the most common. And I think that that's like completely stupid. Okay. And let me start going through why. When somebody says somebody's got Alzheimer's, how do you diagnose that? Is there a question you can ask them, a historical question? Did you trip over a chair? Okay. No, there's no question you could ask that confirms Alzheimer's. Well, is there a physical exam? Can you put the stethoscope on them somewhere? No, there's no physical exam finding to diagnose Alzheimer's. Is there a reliable blood test? There's no reliable blood test that you can confidently diagnose Alzheimer's. Well, how about imaging? Brain MRI? No, you can't confidently diagnose it. They're going to say parietal atrophy and medial temporal lobe atrophy. I seldom see that pattern, okay? It's not a reliable pattern to diagnose it on. And what about nuclear medicine imaging for beta amyloid or something? It's still not that reliable. It can push you in that direction, but it's not that great a test. What about autopsy? Even at autopsy, they'll see patients who don't have so-called Alzheimer's that have a lot of senile plaques, neurofibrillary tangles, and they'll see so-called Alzheimer patient that doesn't have that. They can't confidently diagnose it typically at autopsy either. So I mean, and then what about the treatment? They give these nonsense pills or these, immunotherapies with tons of side effects that don't really help. So it's stupid. I mean, what I'm saying, you can't diagnose a disease and you can't treat it either. You're like in fantasy land. That's all nonsense. That's BS. Okay, so that's a bullshit disease. You can't diagnose it and you can't treat it. I rest my case. It's a joke. Okay, so you may have imagine a field based on that. It's so stupid. It's like a comedy. We're of the same contemporary, so we have to pretend we respect it. But could you imagine if you were reading about something from the 1700s and they kept on talking about a disease they couldn't diagnose and that they couldn't treat? You'd say they're a bunch of idiots, okay? It's a big lie just trying to sell drugs. It's bogus, all right? And it makes people stupid. Nobody knows what to do. We're going to talk about my neurovascular uncoupling theory, and that along with Delatorre's theory. They tell you exactly what to do. I'll get into that later, though, because you have to know a little bit more about the function of brain cells, of neurons, before we can really get into that. But I think that's one thing. It'll really help you, because that's also a thing where I have a big advantage over all these nutrition guys on the internet. Because with all these typical nutrition guys, they're going to tell you if it's good for the heart, it's good for the brain. And yeah, that's true, but the brain's a lot more fussy. There's a lot more stuff to know about the brain than there is to know about the heart, okay? It's more of an advanced class. Okay. Let's see. What's new about this book? I think the unique thing about this book is there's tons of drawings in it. And that's hard to find. And they're all in one spot. In my earlier books, like I said, I think I had better prose. But in my earlier books, I didn't have as good a drawing. I didn't even know how to put a drawing into a book at that time. You can watch videos. Almost everything in this entire book, I've made a video about it one time or another. And you can even just hit that button print screen to make a picture of the slide if you want to keep reference photos. Also, the way I tend to talk about diseases and stuff, I start out with useful common knowledge and useful information that you will benefit from. Everybody will benefit from. And I'll often go off on a tangent because it's interesting, show how it connects to other things. And then that'll create an AO, academic orgasm, so to speak. And so, but, what I'm trying to say is, don't be intimidated if I get into stuff that gets a little bit too complicated for a brief moment. I'll always kind of come back down to the basics, but that kind of makes it more fun and, talk to a wide audience of levels of experience. So, yeah, AO is an academic orgasm. Okay. And this is sort of an intro chapter. I usually would only put one illustration on a page because it's technically challenging to format all these images, and if you screw up one image format, things start jumping around and you could get a whole bunch of images out of alignment. Let me see, I don't want to get into all this stuff. Oh, another point is, standard of care is designed for cognitively impaired people, so you always want seek out optimal care. Don't be a chump and fall for standard of care. Don't get me wrong, a lot of times optimal care and standard of care are the same thing, but always make sure that they are when someone you care about getting treatment or yourself. Let's see. And like I said, so many patients, they're cognitively slow. That's why doctors always talk in that polite, kind of dopey way, because they don't know if the patient's cognitively impaired until they start talking to them a little bit. Okay. And we kind of showed this diagram already. You can take your pick, the two paths that diverge in a wood. You go down conventional, you're going to get drug, 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 then you're going to get surgery, surgery, chop, 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 bye-bye money, dead early. Or you go down this path, avoid toxins, eat low-fat vegan, avoid excess EMF, and Johnson will keep working. You'll avoid the pills and surgery, and you'll probably live an extra, 10 to 20 years. Okay, and here's a couple other important points. This one comes from William Roberts, and he's got his own YouTube channel. I think it's just his name, William Roberts. It might be William C. Roberts. He's the guy who was a cardiac pathologist. He wrote a really good paper about quantitative assessment of atherosclerosis in patients who died of cardiac complications. So patients who died of myocardial infarction or arrhythmias related to ischemia. And what he found is that there was no such thing as single vessel disease, atherosclerosis isolated to one vessel. It was always diffuse. And that's an important point. It's like systemic metastatic cancer, okay? Just like you can only treat a diffuse disease throughout the body with either chemo or how about a good diet, okay? The positive way to treat it. He also said that if you feed a herbivore a high-fat diet, and humans have herbivore physiology for digestion, they all get atherosclerosis, 100% of them. And that's also why I think cardiac calcium CT is stupid, because you have it. If you ate a Western diet, it's guaranteed that you have atherosclerosis. So why do you need to radiate yourself with the CAT scan? You already know you have it. And I know some patients, they just don't get it. You talk to them about pathophysiology, their eyes glaze over, they don't get it. But then you show them a CAT scan. That's your heart. You got a big calcification right there. They're like, oh my God. So maybe some people need that, but I think most don't. If you can think about things intelligently, you don't need that. Dr. McDougall says the major dietary poisons are animal foods and cooking oils. Pritikin says fat is bad. Gregory Sloop, the best atherosclerosis researcher in the world, he's the guy who wrote that book, Atherothrombosis Theory. He says dietary fat makes the blood thick. Yep. So then you're pumping a milkshake instead of water. It's also called to make the blood thick, increasing blood viscosity, and then you need to pump at a higher pressure to pump a thicker fluid. Okay, so the point I'm saying is, if you ate the SAD diet in the past, or something close to it, or a high meat, oils, high fat diet, you've got atherosclerosis. You have predispositions to all these Western diets. So just stop doing it. Like Esselstyn said, you read the epidemiology all around the world, the people who eat the plant-based diet in their traditional ways, they don't have these problems. And the people who eat the westernized diet, they all have these problems. So you want to turn things around as fast as you can. So Esselstyn says, how do you turn it around? Just stop eating anything that causes atherosclerosis. And I would say avoid anything that causes atherosclerosis, insulin resistance, or hypertension. And it's pretty easy to do. You just learn what the things are and you avoid them. And then you also do the other stuff. Get your sleep, avoid stress, avoid caffeine, avoid toxins, have a sense of purpose, all that kind of stuff. All right, so that was kind of a quick intro chapter. We'll cover more, in the next session. So that's the end of this video.